Chapter 20. As soon as the jade box was opened, a gust of frigid air overflowed. The temperature in the warehouse began to plummet rapidly. Han Shuo couldn't help but shiver once again. He then focused all his attention on the item within the green jade box. It was an emerald green ball. The surface of the ball was like jade, and it even sparkled with a faintly discernible green halo. There was a small red dot in the center, like a rolling drop of fresh blood, swaying continuously within the ball. A sudden pain in his head, Han Shuo felt his mental strength begin to rapidly drain into the ball. It was somewhat similar to the feeling when he used necromancy magic. The green surface of the ball became even more emerald after Han Shuo's mental strength had flowed into it. The red dot in the center, like a drop of fresh blood, suddenly lit up with a blood-red light. Piercing pain. It was like a sharp dagger violently stirring in Han Shuo's brain. As his mental strength rapidly drained away, Han Shuo's brain was in so much pain that he was hovering between life and death. Han Shuo had never experienced such cruel pain in his entire life. At this moment of extreme pain, Han Shuo should have fainted in a daze, but the strange thing was that Han Shuo's mind was unprecedentedly clear. Han Shuo even felt that it was precisely because his mind was unprecedentedly clear that the pain was infinitely magnified. Clutching his head with both hands, Han Shuo was like a wild beast being minced into pieces, emitting low, hoarse growls that didn't sound human. Han Shuo's mental strength continued to flow slowly into the ball as the inhuman pain continued. At this moment, the veins on Han Shuo's forehead, neck, and bare arms were bulging, twisting and writhing on Han Shuo's body like earthworms. The muscles on his already somewhat robust body seemed to be brimming with explosive power. Just as Han Shuo felt that his mental strength was about to be completely drained, the magical yuan in his body flowed from his neck to his brain. As soon as the magical yuan entered his brain, which felt like it was about to split open, the unforgettable pain seemed to increase tenfold in intensity. The mental strength that had just been rapidly drained into the ball surged back like a stormy sea, instantly drowning Han Shuo. Han Shuo finally could not bear it and directly fainted. When Han Shuo slowly awoke, he felt as exhausted and powerless as if he'd gone through a long journey of 10,000 li. However, his mind was abnormally clear. When he focused his attention on his surroundings, Han Shuo discovered that he could clearly see the grain on the wooden door in front of him. Han Shuo let out a soft "eh" as he was stunned by the changes. The last time he had this feeling was when he had accidentally gained mental strength. Only then did he feel that his senses had become more sensitive. Now that this feeling was even clearer, Han Shuo hurriedly concentrated his mental strength to test it out. His face was instantly filled with ecstasy. Han Shuo thought to himself, the saying that one who survives a great calamity is bound to have good fortune later on is indeed true. How could he not have died in that dangerous situation just now? Now that he had profited from his misfortune, he inexplicably felt that his mental strength had greatly increased. It was even more than the mental strength that Han Shuo had painstakingly increased over the past 2 months of meditation. This kind of unimaginable thing had happened just like that, causing Han Shuo to be shocked. His gaze once again landed on the dark green ball in front of him. At this time, the faint green halo on the surface of the ball seemed to have dimmed a bit, but the captivating red that resembled a drop of fresh blood was even more vivid. Frowning, Han Shuo moved a few inches away and carefully sized up the emerald green ball. He suddenly felt that this ball was extremely similar to something else. After some careful thought, Han Shuo was startled. He suddenly felt that this ball was very much like an eyeball. After this feeling arose, Han Shuo carefully observed the ball, feeling that the more he looked at it, the more similar it seemed. As the bright red drop of blood within the emerald green ball rolled, it was as if an eye was turning and sizing him up, giving Han Shuo an extremely strange feeling. Shuddering, Han Shuo abruptly closed the jade box, feeling his hair stand on end. With a clack, the jade box was locked again, and the key that had been inserted into the groove automatically popped out. Shaking his head, Han Shuo discarded the association between the ball and the eyeball from his mind. He pondered silently in his heart, feeling that this ball was a bit odd the more he thought about it. If it wasn't for the fact that his magical yuan had suddenly circulated to his brain today, his mental strength would certainly have been sucked dry by this ball, and he wouldn't have been able to withstand the inhuman pain and become a true lunatic. However, when the magical yuan had finally circulated to his brain, the mental strength that had been sucked out had suddenly returned like a river flowing backwards, and had even greatly increased his mental strength. This made Han Shuo feel that this ball was even more bizarre and unfathomable. He vaguely felt that this ball was absolutely not an ordinary item, otherwise Duke wouldn't have killed Dylan for the sake of this jade box. As for the emerald green ball within the jade box, Han Shuo couldn't figure out what it was no matter how hard he tried, and what it did. However, this ball had almost turned Han Shuo into an idiot, and he still felt a lingering fear when he thought about it now. He immediately put the jade box away and once again placed it under his bed, preparing to investigate what was inside and what it was for. The next day, when Han Shuo got up, he felt that his body was much better than it had been yesterday. When he was washing up early in the morning, he saw Carrie and Borg cleaning up the stone statues on the road. The two of them seemed to have woken up much earlier than usual, and were even yawning now. When Carrie and Borg saw Han Shuo, they forced smiles on their faces towards Han Shuo from afar, reminding Han Shuo to plead for them with Master Fanny as soon as possible. After eating breakfast, Han Shuo walked straight to the training fields after listening to Master Jean's lecture on the basics of magic while sweeping the corridors in front of the necromancy classroom. Brian, Fitch is in the training fields, asking Master Fanny for some magical knowledge. I beg you, you must hurry and plead for us or we're really done for. When he was at the door, Han Shuo ran into Carrie and Borg, who had just helped clean the training fields. The two hurriedly begged when they saw Han Shuo. Nodding, Han Shuo said lazily, all right, I'll go find Master Fanny now. Fitch and Jean were estranged, and Fitch had long since become a journeyman mage, so he naturally didn't need to continue listening to Jean's lectures on the basics of magic. When Han Shuo arrived at the training fields, he discovered that Fanny had her back to the door. A black strip of cloth was tied to the back of her head, and the black magic robe clung tightly to her perfect body. From the back, Fanny had a slender waist and narrow shoulders, and a round, perky but drawing out the exquisite curves of a person's heart. On the side, Fitch looked at Fanny with an intoxicated expression. His eyes sparkled with the light of greed mixed with adoration and lust. He couldn't help but roam over Fanny's wonderful body, and didn't notice Han Shuo's arrival at all. Fitch, watch closely. Even though my eyes are blindfolded, I can still use my previous memories to instruct the dark creatures to find the right target to attack. Fanny's eyes were covered by the black strip of cloth. As she spoke, several zombies leapt over some obstacles and viciously smashed the wooden statues with the clubs in their hands. Fanny, who was focused on teaching, naturally didn't know that Fitch wasn't paying attention to what she was saying at the moment. Fitch's attention was completely focused on her wonderful curves. Han Shuo saw that Fitch wasn't paying attention to Fanny's explanations at all, and only kept his eyes roving over Fanny's body. No wonder this kid hadn't advanced to Adept Mage after so many attempts. It looked like Fitch must be using Fanny's magical knowledge as an excuse to spend some time alone with Fanny. Fanny was blindfolded now, and must be teaching Fitch how to use his heart to instruct the dark creatures to attack. Han Shuo saw many obstacles around him as he walked, and couldn't help but carefully avoid them as he inched closer to Fitch and Fanny. When he was about to reach Fanny and Fitch, who'd been staring at Fanny like an idiot, finally came to his senses. When he turned his head slightly and saw that it was Han Shuo, a trace of undisguised disgust appeared in Fitch's eyes. Fitch then waved the magic staff in his hand and chanted a couple of incantations in a low voice. Some of the obstacles on the ground seemed to suddenly come alive, and a few broken white bones abruptly shot towards Han Shuo's buttocks. Some ropes also suddenly tightened and coiled towards Han Shuo like snakes. Han Shuo's body was a bit weaker than usual today due to last night's events. His steps were a bit disorganized as he frantically dodged, and he was finally tripped by a rope that suddenly appeared and fell abruptly towards Fanny and Fitch. Fanny was currently focused on controlling the dark creatures to attack their targets with her mental strength as she continued to narrate to Fitch. Although she heard some sounds, she didn't pay them too much attention. Seeing that he was about to fall towards Fitch and Fanny, although Han Shuo was calm, his hands still flailed about in an attempt to grab onto something that could stabilize his body. But at this moment, a trace of a cold smile tugged at the corners of Fitch's mouth as he raised his magic staff slightly and swung it in the direction that Han Shuo was falling towards. It looked like he was obviously up to no good. His mind in a mess, Han Shuo forcefully twisted his body slightly to the left in the air, wanting to avoid Fitch's attack. When his body fell towards Fanny, the effects of Han Shuo's magical yuan cultivation were revealed. He abruptly tightened his waist and exerted force in his lower abdomen, and his body that was about to pounce towards Fanny actually magically stopped. However, Han Shuo's wildly flailing right hand didn't withdraw in time, and it actually landed on Fanny's perky buttocks. In that instant, the mellow, supple and soft beauty of ecstasy was immediately transmitted to Han Shuo's mind through the wonderful contact between Han Shuo's right hand and Fanny's buttocks. For some strange reason, Han Shuo actually pinched it softly before he abruptly reacted and flew backwards. Han Shuo was extremely terrified when he understood his absurd actions just now. He thought to himself that Fanny would never let him go, so why had he pinched her buttocks just now? Even though it had felt wonderful. As he flew to dodge, he saw Fitch standing next to Fanny. His eyes were spitting fire, and his entire body was trembling as he looked at him, as if he'd committed the evil deed of killing his entire family. Fanny also cried out in shock and immediately tore off the black cloth covering her eyes. Fanny would never let him go this time. It's over, Han Shuo thought. Slap slap. 2 slaps. 2 red handprints suddenly appeared on Fitch's face as he glared at Han Shuo furiously. Fanny's face was filled with rage as she glared at Fitch with a murderous look on her face. Her towering breasts shook repeatedly as she angrily rebuked, "Damned Fitch, how dare you take advantage of the situation to violate me?" Chapter 21. I didn't, it was Brian who did it. Fitch's face was wry as he spoke to Fanny with extreme grievance. Slap slap. Another 2 slaps. This time, Fitch's cheeks were already swollen. Fanny looked angrily at Fitch and said hatefully, "You still dare to quibble? How could an honest person like Brian do such a despicable thing? It must be you." Han Shuo was speechless and snickered endlessly in his heart. He hurriedly squeezed out an extremely innocent and honest expression and stared blankly at Fitch and Fanny. He smiled dumbly and said, "What is it?" "Master Fanny, it really wasn't me." Fitch was even more wronged than Daoist as he covered his cheeks and explained with a pained expression. "Stop quibbling and get the hell out of here now." Fanny looked at Fitch with a face full of exasperation at his failure to live up to her expectations and said viciously. Fitch's face was swollen from the slaps, and he knew that there was no point in explaining himself when he saw that Fanny was on the verge of exploding at any moment. He was deathly afraid that Fanny would act again if he pushed her too far. He couldn't help but smile wryly and nod his head, walking out of the training fields with a dejected expression. Fitch's body paused when he passed by Brian and stared hatefully at Han Shuo a few times. He then gritted his teeth and said softly, "You're ruthless." Han Shuo seemed to be completely unaware of Fitch's hatred and even flashed a friendly and silly smile at Fitch. He said dumbly, "Why have you suddenly put on weight?" Fitch was greatly enraged as he covered his face and looked hatefully at Han Shuo again. He then quickly passed through the obstacles in his path and disappeared outside the door in the blink of an eye. "Brian, what are you doing here?" Master Fanny's anger slowly subsided as she asked Han Shuo after Fitch had left. "Cleaning up." Han Shuo minded his own business and picked up a broom in a corner of the training fields, preparing to clean up the field for the necromancy major students to use. "Oh, so it's like this. By the way, how's the injury on your back? When your injuries are healed, I'll have to take a closer look at what's going on with you. It's incredible that an agony of the soul spell could actually give you mental strength." When facing Han Shuo, Fanny appeared to be amiable. She spoke to Han Shuo peacefully while helping Han Shuo clear some obstacles on the ground without putting on any airs. "Good, much better. By the way, Teacher Fanny, can you not tell the school about what happened yesterday? Han Shuo casually swept the broken bones and dust on the ground. He took the time to sniff his right hand that had just touched Fanny's buttocks. A faint fragrance seeped out from the fingers of his right hand, causing Han Shuo's heart to flutter. His eyes immediately looked strangely at Fanny's perky buttocks not too far away. When Fanny had bent over to clear the obstacles, her body was slightly arched, contrasting the curves of her buttocks even more captivating, as if it carried a kind of magical allure. Fanny was a bit surprised when she heard Han Shuo's words. She straightened her body and turned to look at Han Shuo, asking in surprise, "Why?" Brian, you're too inattentive, you've stepped on the broom." Han Shuo had a guilty conscience when he hadn't anticipated that Fanny would suddenly turn around. He hurriedly removed his foot from the broom and said with a silly smile, "Carrie and Borg are actually very good people. If you tell the school about this, they'll be expelled. Their families will have a hard time without their silver coins in the future." When these words were spoken, Fanny looked at Han Shuo with some surprise. Her dark eyebrows furrowed slightly, and she smiled after a while. "Brian, you're always so kind. They bullied you, but you're still pleading on their behalf. Forget it. Since you, the victim, have said so, I won't make things difficult for them. You're the key to my experiment, so remember to tell me if anyone bullies you in the future." Han Shuo was speechless, thinking to himself that he was indeed very kind now. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken the opportunity to coerce Carrie and Borg into doing things for him. If it wasn't for the fact that the two of them had left, he and Jack would have had to shoulder heavy responsibilities. Who would care about their lives? While Han Shuo's thoughts were running wild, Fanny looked suspiciously at Han Shuo and opened her mouth again. "Brian, I don't think you're that crazy. Otherwise, why would you say such things?" Starting with surprise, Han Shuo's heart immediately trembled. He hastily scratched his head and said with some embarrassment, Sometimes I suddenly feel dizzy and I don't know what I'm going to do after that." "I see. It looks like the agony of the soul did have some negative effects when it landed on you. Don't worry too much. I'll give you a careful examination when the injury on your back gets better. I'll be sure to cure your strange ailments. It's about time. I still need to take the students to do the next few experiments. I'll go back and prepare. You clean up this place yourself." Fanny said a few words to Han Shuo and recited a necromancy incantation, sending the zombie warriors that had been summoned from the training fields back to the other dimension. She then left the training fields. Not long after Fanny left, Han Shuo also left to find Carrie and Borg, ignoring the mess that was the training fields. He said arrogantly to the two, "Don't worry, I've taken care of your matters. Now you two, go clean up the training fields." Carrie and Borg were pleasantly surprised. After thanking Han Shuo, they eagerly picked up a broom and mop and happily left to help Han Shuo clean up the mess. Han Shuo had nothing to do after leaving the training fields. When he thought about what had happened yesterday, Han Shuo was quite curious about what was inside the jade box. He very much wanted to know just what the round ball inside was. Han Shuo couldn't ask anyone else about this matter, so he decided to head to the Dark Major's library after some thought and see if there were any records about the round ball. Each major had their own library within the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. The books within each library were extremely rich, containing all sorts of detailed descriptions of all sorts of knowledge within the entire major. Normally speaking, the library wasn't open to the public, and there were strict rules and regulations for students from different majors to use the library. Using the excuse of helping Jack clean up, Han Shuo swaggered into the Dark Major's library with a brush in his hand. "Brian, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be cleaning the training fields at this time?" Little Fatty Jack, who was arranging the magic books, couldn't help but exclaim softly when he saw Han Shuo walk in with a brush. "Heh, Carrie and Borg, those two idiots, will be helping me clean the training field missions in the future. I've come to the library for official business this time." Han Shuo smiled faintly and casually picked up a magic book to take a look. He put it back after discovering that it was a book on the foundations of Dark Major magic. "Carrie and Borg are helping you clean the training fields? How is that possible?" Could it be because you scared them after beating them up in the training fields yesterday? Little Fatty Jack's face was full of surprise, and then he seemed to recall Han Shua's performance in the training fields yesterday. He looked at Han Shua with a bit of fear and continued, "Oh right, Brian, what happened to you yesterday? Why did it seem like you'd suddenly become a different person? We're so close, but even I was scared when I looked at you yesterday." Putting his hand on Jack's shoulder, Han Shua laughed lightly. "That depends on who I'm dealing with. If it's someone who's against me, I naturally won't let them have it easy. With our relationship, I obviously won't beat you up. Alright, Jack, where are the books that describe magical items in the Dark Mage's library?" "Here, the second bookcase in the back." "Why are you asking this?" Jack pointed behind Han Shua and asked in confusion. "Nothing much, I'm just helping you clean up." Han Shua smiled and walked towards the bookcase with descriptions of magical items. "But Brian, I've already cleaned that bookcase." "Then I'll help you clean it again." Han Shua picked up a magical book from the bottom row and started flipping through it when he arrived at the bookcase that described magical items. He tossed the brush in his hand carelessly to the side. When he'd been observing the jade box last night, Han Shua's mental strength had strangely flowed towards the ball within the jade box. This had caused Han Shua to faintly feel the magical pulses within the ball. The current Han Shua was no longer a newbie who knew nothing about magical knowledge. He naturally understood that the magical pulses meant that the ball should be some kind of magical item, and so he'd come to the library to search for the origins of the ball. Unfortunately, Han Shua flipped through the books for a long time and read through most of them, only to discover that these books only had simple descriptions of common magical staffs, robes, and accessories. They weren't what he wanted to know at all. Dejectedly and helplessly tidying up the place, Han Shua no longer held any hope for the books here. Instead, he went to the bookcase that contained the books on necromancy. Since he'd come to the library, he couldn't possibly return empty-handed. No matter what, he should bring a book back to read. Han Shua thought as he started flipping through the books in the bookcase. Some of the magical books on the bookcase were more advanced, and Han Shua probably wouldn't be able to understand them even if he brought them back. Therefore, he focused his attention on the bottom row. A magical book titled Introduction to Dark Creatures attracted Han Shua's attention. Han Shua picked it up and flipped through a few pages. He discovered that this book mainly talked about necromancers' descriptions of dark creatures that they could summon. Overjoyed, Han Shua immediately found Jack and waved, "Introduction to Dark Creatures," at Jack. He chuckled and said, "Jack, I'll take this book to study. Help me cover it up and don't let anyone notice." With that, Han Shua didn't wait for Jack to speak. He excitedly hid the book in his clothes, grabbed the brush, and left the library. Chapter 22. Time flew by, and half a month had passed in the blink of an eye. This half a month was the most relaxing period of Han Shua's life. Borg and Carrie had taken on Han Shua's cleaning duties separately. Add to that the fact that Han Shua's back was injured, and Fanny hadn't sought out Han Shua for research. Han Shua had learned from Jack that even Fitch had once again gone to undergo the Adept Mage Advancement trial. Therefore, this major enemy was no longer a threat for the time being. Ever since Han Shua's shameless confession at the bottom of the trap, Lisa's attitude towards Han Shua had undergone a drastic change. Not only did she no longer cause trouble for Han Shua, but she also frequently defended Han Shua and forbade other students from using Han Shua to practice necromancy magic at this time. Since then, apart from eating, drinking, and taking a dump, Han Shua had spent all his free time training his magical yuan and studying the two books, The Foundations of Necromancy and A Summary of Dark Creatures. Actually, because of his training in magical yuan, the injuries on Han Shua's back had long since healed. There wasn't even a scar left behind. The current Han Shua had grown another 2 centimeters taller and was now 1.7 meters tall. Because of his training in magical yuan and sufficient nutrition from his meals, his originally frail body was slowly becoming stronger and stronger. The muscles on his chest, abdomen, and arms were even beginning to bulge. Without anyone noticing, Han Shua's body and strength were slowly changing without anyone noticing. The training of the mystical glacial spellfire had also reached a critical juncture. When Han Shuo circulated his magical yuan, he could already follow the path of the mystical glacial spellfire and circulate the magical yuan into his palms. Every time Han Shuo circulated the mystical glacial spellfire and circulated the magical yuan to his two palms, he could feel that one of his palms was icy cold and the other was scorching hot. Furthermore, the skin on his palms would turn a faint purplish red, making his palms look very strange. Regarding the strange jade box, Han Shuo did not act rashly during this period of time, afraid that the situation from last time would happen again. Before figuring out what the ball was and what it could do, Han Shuo didn't dare to take any more risks. After half a month of studying an overview of dark creatures, Han Shuo had a clearer understanding of some of the dark creatures summoned by the necromancy major. He understood some of the communication methods between the summoned creatures and the summoner. He also understood how to send the summoned dark creatures to another dimension. Except, although there was a magical incantation to send the summoned creatures of darkness to another dimension in the Compendium of Creatures of Darkness, and Han Shuo believed that he was completely capable of doing this with his current mental strength, he hadn't dared put it into practice. This was because Han Shuo didn't know if he would be able to summon the little skull again after sending him to another dimension. This little skull with 7 bone spurs had been meticulously refined by Han Shuo through refining demonic treasures. Not only was it stronger than the average skeleton in all aspects, it also had a terrifying immunity to light magic. During this period of time, Han Shuo and the little skull had interacted day and night, and the little skull had helped Han Shuo a lot. Han Shuo already had feelings for him, and was worried that if he were to send the little skull to another dimension, he might not be able to summon the little skull the next time, and then he would lose him forever. It was precisely because of this concern that Han Shuo had the confidence to send the little skull back to the other dimension, but he didn't do so. He would rather let the little skull stay under the bed, even at the risk of being discovered by others, and insisted on keeping the little skull there. The little skull in front of him was lying lazily in the wooden barrel. Its bones were as dark as ink and shone with a misty light. For the past half a month, Han Shuo had often infused magical yuan into the small wooden barrel, using the magical yin concentration matrix to slowly refine it. The little skull had become more and more agile and strong after being refined by Han Shuo. The little skull's bone dagger was even sharper than the average sword. Han Shuo had once experimented with a bone fragment, and found that the bone fragment was instantly severed with a single slash of the bone dagger. While the little skull was constantly changing, Han Shuo had also benefited greatly from the training of the solid level of demonic yuan. Han Shuo's body had undergone a mysterious transformation. However, up until now, Han Shuo still couldn't break through this level of demonic yuan. Han Shuo carefully recalled the memories of crazy Ol, Chu Kanglin, and his understanding of some of the subsequent events. He came to a conclusion: if he wanted to quickly advance to the solid level, breaking and building was the most effective and fastest method. Every time Han Shuo was beaten up, or his skin and flesh were damaged, his body would recover quickly through the training of demonic yuan. Every time he recovered, his body would be stronger than usual, and his skin, flesh, and bones would be more resilient. Only by being damaged would he be able to speed up the training of the solid level after the demonic yuan was refined. After figuring this out, Han Shuo couldn't help but smile wryly. He thought to himself that the training of demonic yuan was basically suicidal. But now that he had embarked on this path, he had no choice but to find a way to quickly break through the solid level in order to increase his strength and gain even more strength. On this day, Han Shuo's figure appeared at the entrance to the martial arts school of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. After a few days of investigation, Han Shuo understood that the martial arts school was a place that specialized in training warriors and knights. However, the training of warriors and knights was completely separate. The students of the martial arts school were mainly commoners, and they only trained in fighting aura and martial arts, as well as some thoughts of loyalty to the emperor. The majority of the students in the knight school were nobles. It was a training ground for the sons of the royal family and warlords of the empire. These students often had extraordinary backgrounds, and their families were either strong or weak. Not only did they have to train in fighting aura and martial arts, but they also had to learn some noble etiquette, battle strategies, and the art of commanding. In the Knight Academy, these people learned all kinds of knowledge in order to have a good future in their own clans or in the empire. These kinds of Knight Academy students were all quite wealthy. In order to advance to senior knight, they didn't hesitate to spend money to find some commoners to be their sparring partners in actual combat to help them practice their martial skills. Some commoners who thought of themselves as physically strong would endure their blows in exchange for money in order to receive generous rewards. Even some commoner warrior students would come to be their human targets for money. Except, it wasn't easy to earn money. Some knight students would even beat some human targets to death when they missed. But because this was a consensual matter on both sides, the knight students paid the money. Even if the human targets were accidentally beaten to death, it was their own fault and no one would care. Han Shuo had come here to become one of these human targets. However, Han Shuo wasn't here for money, but to train his body and break through to the solid realm of magical yuan. Many human targets stood in a spacious hall. These people were all strong and muscular, and wore the uniform of a poor commoner. Han Shuo focused his attention and discovered that there were some warriors mixed in. Some had come from outside the academy because of its reputation, and some were students of the warrior school. You're an errand boy of the academy, but your body isn't strong and you're not a warrior. Aren't you going to your death by coming here? Young man, I advise you not to earn this money, or you'll be beaten to death. A thin old man looked at Han Shuo from the entrance of the hall. Old man Jeff was in his 50s and was in the same profession as Han Shuo. He wore the clothes of an errand boy and was in charge of helping these human targets register. He felt that Han Shuo's body was emaciated and tried to persuade Han Shuo out of goodwill. Don't worry, Mr. Jeff, just help me register. I really want to try. Han Shuo looked at Jeff and pleaded. Since you're so insistent, then I'll help you register. AI, do you think this money is easy to earn? If you really are beaten to death, don't blame me for not warning you. Jeff saw that Han Shuo persisted after many attempts at persuasion, and that there were still people queuing up behind him to urge him, so he finally couldn't dissuade Han Shuo. He sighed and agreed, helping Han Shuo register Brian's name. When Han Shuo walked into the hall, the other human targets all looked at Han Shuo with odd expressions. Most of their gazes were filled with disdain, but there were also a few kind-hearted people who revealed expressions of pity and even urged Han Shuo not to try. Although Han Shuo's body was a bit stronger than Brian's from before after cultivating the demonic arts, because Brian's original body was all skin and bones like a skinny monkey, Han Shuo was only a bit stronger than the original Brian. Compared to these brawny men whose arms were thicker than his thighs, there was naturally a world of difference. Listen to me, you'd better leave this place as soon as possible, or you'll certainly be beaten to death. As Han Shuo sized up his surroundings, a thin young man in his 20s came to Han Shuo's side and spoke up to persuade him. This young man was wearing the uniform of a warrior student. Although his body didn't look strong enough, because he was a warrior himself, there was no doubt that his strength was much stronger than those who only looked strong on the outside, but didn't cultivate any martial arts or fighting aura. Thank you, I'd like to try. Han Shuo revealed a friendly smile, nodded at the young man, and said faintly, My name is Jared, and I often come here to earn some extra money. Even with my strength as a journeyman swordsman, I've been seriously injured by them before. I've seen too many people accidentally beat to death in order to earn this kind of money. I hope you can listen to my advice and leave this place as soon as possible, or you'll really regret it. Jared looked sincerely at Han Shuo and tried to persuade him with a face full of sincerity. Smiling and shaking his head, Han Shuo smiled and said, My name is Brian. Jared, it's nice to meet you. I'm very grateful for your good intentions, but I must try. Seeing that Han Shuo was so insistent, Jared couldn't help but sigh. He shook his head and didn't say anything else, but his gaze when looking at Han Shuo was full of sympathy. It looked like he believed that Han Shuo would die without a doubt. Chapter 23. Alright, our noble future knights have arrived. Good luck to all of you. Jeff suddenly called out as Han Shua and Jared were speaking. As Jeff's voice fell, a dozen or so knight students in gorgeous clothing and exquisite swords walked in one after another from the entrance of the hall. Most of them were young men, but there were also a few young women. After they came in, they all looked at the human targets in the hall with arrogant and scrutinizing gazes. The warriors in the hall were the first to be noticed, because these people were much stronger than ordinary people. They were also the most useful to their actual combat training, so they were naturally the first to be noticed. Some of the warriors, led by Jared, were the first to be targeted by these people. After both parties had agreed on a price, they were brought to the training grounds for training. Jared was one of them. Before he left, he even cast a regretful glance at Han Shua from afar. Among the human targets, the warriors were the most powerful, and thus the most useful to the knight students in actual combat. If the knight students wanted to hire them, they would naturally have to pay far more than the average well-developed commoner. After the human targets in the hall were hired, the rest were commoners. The commoners with well-developed limbs and well-built bodies were the first to be chosen. These people all bulged out their huge muscles and posed as if they were very strong and muscular. They wore ingratiating smiles on their faces as they looked at the future knights, hoping that they would be chosen to receive generous rewards. Han Shua's figure was not eye-catching to begin with, and he was completely blocked by these tall and muscular men, making him seem even more unimportant. Seeing these knight students choose their targets and leave one after another, Han Shua couldn't help but feel anxious. The three muscular men stood in three different directions around Han Shua, almost completely blocking Han Shua's body. Some of the knight students probably wouldn't even be able to see Han Shua. This made Han Shua anxious, and he began to look for ways to make himself more conspicuous. "Hey big guy, let me pass," Han Shua said with a friendly smile as he patted a 2-meter mountain of meat in front of him. The strong man's skin was bronze in color. From the back, he looked like a tiger with a bear's waist. He was about 2 meters tall and had strong muscles. He looked like a bodybuilder that Han Shua had seen before. When he heard Han Shua's words, he turned around and glared fiercely at Han Shua. The muscles on his right biceps suddenly bulged and tightened, forming a small mountain of flesh. Only then did he let out a proud, cold laugh and turned his head away without saying a word. "Damn it, so what if you're big?" Han Shua sneered in his heart as well. He reached out with his left hand and placed it on the back of his waist. Suddenly, he pushed out with his left hand. Thud, thud, thud. The muscular man's body staggered as Han Shua's force surged into his lower back. He stumbled forward 3 steps. Because there were too many of these mountains of flesh in the hall, it was already quite crowded. This person's sudden collision caused the people next to him to suffer the same fate. They were also pushed aside involuntarily, and the area in front of Han Shua suddenly became chaotic. "Damn it, Daniel, are you trying to break the rules?" The other mountains of flesh that had been knocked over by the man named Daniel immediately yelled angrily at Daniel after stabilizing themselves. "It's not me, it's the kid in the back causing trouble." The muscular man Daniel explained innocently to the muscular men next to him. He glared fiercely at Han Shua and said coldly, "Kid, do you want to die prematurely?" Han Shua had already taken the opportunity to walk out at this moment. He stood at the edge of the hall and occupied a rather good position. Han Shua chuckled coldly when he heard Daniel's words. He also extended his right hand and made the same bodybuilding pose that Daniel had just done. He bulged his biceps and adopted an "I'm very strong" pose. His eyebrow arched as he nodded and looked provocatively at Daniel. Suddenly, a few more knight students came in one after the other. These people had been planning on choosing meat targets in the back, but when they saw that there seemed to be a good show to watch, they couldn't help but temporarily stop their hiring and look over with interest. Han Shua had seen these new knight students come in, which was why he'd arrogantly adopted a provocative pose. With Han Shua's body, it looked like it would be a bit difficult to be chosen from these people. If he wanted to stand out, just relying on his own body and blowing his own trumpet wouldn't be of much use. The fastest way was to use his tyrannical strength to defeat a mountain of flesh here. Only then would he be able to win the night student's favor. Except, although Han Shuo had adopted a provocative and arrogant pose, in the eyes of others, they only felt that Han Shuo was an idiot. When a mountain of flesh like Daniel adopted this pose, it naturally appeared to be quite intimidating. However, a skinny and small Han Shuo who was only 1.7 meters tall could only be said to be so arrogant in the midst of so many mountains of flesh. It could only be said that he was courting death. "Ha, kid, since you're courting death, then I'll fulfill your wish." Daniel didn't immediately fly into a rage when faced with Han Shuo's provocation. Instead, he was amused and laughed heartily. His arm that was thicker than Han Shuo's thigh suddenly swung and grabbed at Han Shuo's head. In this great hall, in order to stand out and gain the attention of the rich and imposing night students, fights between human targets would occur from time to time. It wasn't the slightest bit out of the ordinary. When Daniel saw that Han Shuo's reckless provocation was exactly what he wanted, he thought that he could use this kid to prove his ferocity in front of the night students. Since such a good thing had been delivered to his doorstep, he naturally wasn't angry, but rather delighted. Except, the majority of fierce people with well-developed limbs were usually simple-minded. With the condition of Han Shuo's body, to be able to push him away from the mountain of flesh and cause him to stumble repeatedly, he had never even considered how much strength was required. The errand boy in charge of registering names, Jeff, revealed a pained expression when he saw Daniel reach out to grab at Han Shuo. He couldn't help but shout out, "Daniel, he's an errand boy of our students. You can't injure him badly." "I will," Daniel replied with a smile. His right hand didn't stop, already reaching out to grab Han Shuo's body. Some of the kind-hearted human targets at the side, including some of the more benevolent night students, all revealed expressions that they couldn't bear to watch. In particular, a few young female night students even cried out involuntarily. Just as Daniel's fan-like hand was about to land on Han Shuo's head, Han Shuo's body suddenly shifted, instantly changing the position he was standing in. Daniel's large hand instantly missed. At this moment, Han Shuo chuckled oddly, as if mocking Daniel's helplessness. Then, he extended his left arm again and flexed his left biceps in the exact same posture. He pointed at the small bulge on his left biceps with his right hand and nodded at Daniel. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning was completely expressed. "Do you see? I'm very strong. Ah, this kid is very arrogant. Provocation, absolute provocation. Ha, what an interesting kid." A series of exclamations of surprise came from the mouths of the human targets and the night students respectively. When these people saw that Han Shuo hadn't been caught and was even more arrogant, their interest was immediately piqued. Even the night students who were just discussing prices with the human targets couldn't help but temporarily put aside their conversations and focus their attention here. "Kid, how dare you insult me? I will not let you off today." Daniel's face flushed red like a raging bull that had been instantly provoked. The night students beside him were his gods of wealth, and being humiliated by Han Shuo in such a blatant manner immediately ignited Daniel's anger. Looking at his current appearance, it was likely that Jeff's advice had already been tossed to the back of his mind. As Daniel's voice fell, his eyes looked as if they were about to spit fire. He glared at Han Shuo and clenched his right hand into an iron fist, smashing it fiercely towards Han Shuo. It looked like he no longer intended to capture Han Shuo, but to directly injure Han Shuo's body. Based on the state of the two's bodies, the speed and strength of this punch were worlds apart from the previous one. It was obvious that Daniel was truly enraged this time. If Han Shuo was really hit, he would probably be severely injured even if he didn't die. The people who had been watching out of goodwill earlier began to worry for Han Shuo again. Seeing that the attack was about to reach him, Han Shuo straightened his heel and suddenly twisted his body, miraculously dodging Daniel's iron fist once again. Daniel's punch missed, and his body staggered and flew far away due to inertia. The spectating human targets in front of him all retreated rapidly in shock, afraid that they would be caught in an undeserved calamity. Looking at Han Shuo again, his arms formed a ring shape and placed them on his chest from both sides of his ribs. His fists were facing up, and the backs of his fists were pressed against each other. His chest was raised high, and a disdainful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He once again displayed the provocative posture of a bodybuilder displaying his chest, biceps, and triceps. A series of gasps of surprise suddenly came from the mouths of some of the spectators. Those night students who'd originally been waiting to watch a good show couldn't help but look seriously at Han Shuo. Dodging once might have been enough to prove that Han Shuo had been lucky, but Han Shuo had also dodged under Daniel's increased strength and speed after he'd caught Daniel's attention. This absolutely wasn't something that could be explained by luck. While everyone was still in shock, Daniel was like an enraged wild beast. His eyes were bloodshot, and he once again charged at Han Shuo like a whirlwind after letting out an angry roar. He used both his left and right hands in an attempt to beat Han Shuo into a meat patty. Miracles repeated themselves. Under Daniel's ferocious attacks, Han Shuo was as cunning as a swimming fish. His speed was also extremely fast, and he dodged Daniel's attacks time and time again. He was even able to take the opportunity to assume all sorts of strange and fancy bodybuilding postures that didn't repeat at all. Han Shuo's actions were definitely a naked provocation, a dazzling display of arrogance. Wow, he's so strong. He doesn't repeat even one of these provocative postures. I've never seen it before. A female night student cried out in surprise. This kid is a bit strong. A male night student cried out in surprise. Daniel, we're in trouble this time, a certain mountain of flesh cried out. The entire hall was suddenly in an uproar. Chapter 24. Damn it, I'm going to kill you. Daniel roared crazily. He'd gone completely insane and began to attack Han Shuo as if he were going to throw his life away. However, Han Shuo was like a sturdy boat in the middle of a raging ocean. He looked like he would capsize at any moment, but he was still unscathed. At this point, everyone fully acknowledged Han Shuo's dodging speed. No one thought that Han Shuo's previous dodging was due to luck. Those who'd been worried about Han Shuo all wore relaxed smiles. Even Jeff crossed his arms and looked on with a smile. Finally, Daniel's stamina ran out and he stopped, panting heavily. He glared angrily at Han Shuo and roared, "Brat, take a punch from me if you have the guts. What's the use of just dodging?" Daniel had only been complaining out of anger. Even he himself didn't think that Han Shuo would take a punch from him. However, Han Shuo unexpectedly stopped his various bodybuilding poses and nodded calmly at him. He smiled and said, "No problem." Everyone began to size up Han Shuo again after these words were spoken. Many revealed puzzled expressions. Han Shuo had a small and skinny build, so his speed and agility made sense. However, no one thought that a small and skinny Han Shuo who hadn't trained in fighting aura could compete with Daniel in strength, who was obviously a big muscle man. Even Daniel himself was stunned by Han Shuo's reply. He immediately reacted and laughed wildly, "Good, good, you're courting death, don't blame me." Daniel had always been proud of his strong body and fierce strength, and relied on this to earn this reward. Although Daniel was discouraged that his speed and agility weren't as good as Han Shuo's, he could reluctantly accept it. The opportunity to display his great strength was right in front of him. Whether or not he could wash away the humiliation he'd just suffered depended on this blow. Daniel naturally wasn't willing to let it go. Gathering his strength, Daniel punched out with his right fist. The veins on his entire arm bulged, and his speed and strength were raised to the peak as he suddenly punched at Han Shuo. Han Shuo narrowed his eyes slightly, and a vicious cold light flashed in his pupils. He was like a venomous snake waiting for its prey at the entrance of a cave, giving off a cold and sinister feeling. Just as Daniel's fist was about to land on Han Shuo's face, Han Shuo condensed his magical yuan into a tight fist in his right hand and abruptly punched out, colliding with Daniel's iron fist. But after a crisp sound, Daniel suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream like a pig being slaughtered. His entire right arm drooped, and his clenched right fist curled up like a chicken claw, trembling along with his right arm. The viciousness in Han Shuo's eyes receded, and a harmless smile once again hung on his face. He withdrew his right fist and shook it slightly, looking at his own fist in astonishment. He muttered to himself. I really did take it. Daniel had seen that Han Shua's body was thin and weak, and had just thrown out a punch with all his strength. He wasn't simply trying to teach Han Shua a lesson, but was obviously planning on killing Han Shua. The current Han Shua was no longer a coward who meekly accepted adversity. Although he would feign ignorance, he naturally wouldn't be soft-hearted when faced with someone who wanted to kill him. The bizarre scene of the two's fists colliding completely stunned the many night students and human targets in the hall. Some of the commoner human targets on the side looked at Han Shua with a trace of fear. Those closest to Han Shua all automatically moved away, allowing Han Shua to occupy the best position. The night students were all extremely excited and started whispering to each other in discussion. Some even suspected that Han Shua was one of the rare barbarians on the continent, or that he was a half-beast in human form. Daniel was still howling in pain as his right arm trembled continuously. Everyone knew what the crisp sound just now meant. They knew that Daniel's right arm was most likely crippled from just one exchange of fists. The old errand boy Jeff looked regretfully at Daniel and comforted him softly. Daniel, I'm very sorry that this has happened, but I'm afraid that your body is no longer suitable to remain here. When Daniel heard Jeff's words, he couldn't help but glare at Han Shua with resentment and then walked past Han Shua, walking out of the hall. There were too many people who had been injured in the fights here, so there were already a few rules. Daniel understood his own identity and position, plus he was well aware that he was absolutely no match for Han Shua, so he could only leave early. When Daniel left, Jeff called out loudly, all right, everyone can continue with the negotiations. Many night students walked towards Han Shua as soon as Jeff's words landed, all of them staring at Han Shua and calling out, 1 gold coin, 2 gold coins, 3 gold coins. Under normal circumstances, a commoner human target who accompanied the students during their training would only cost around 10 to 50 silver coins, depending on the student's strength. A strong warrior would normally cost between 1 to 5 gold coins, depending on the warrior's level. Now that these people were calling out 2 to 3 gold coins, it was already an extremely high price. Although Han Shua had displayed his strength just now, Han Shua wasn't a warrior after all. If a slightly stronger warrior had exchanged a punch with Daniel, they could have used their fighting aura to kill Daniel in one blow. Therefore, a price of 2 to 3 gold coins was already an unbelievably high price among commoner human targets. When the first night student called out a price of 1 gold coin, Han Shua had already planned to open his mouth and agree. However, when the second price was called out, Han Shua immediately shut his mouth and waited for a higher price to appear. Although Han Shua hadn't come for money, Han Shua understood the importance of money in this world. It was just as important as it was on Earth. If he could earn 2 gold coins, he naturally wouldn't be willing to earn just 1. The night students walked up to Han Shua one by one and called out different and continuously increasing prices. However, Han Shua was only a commoner after all, and not a warrior with astonishing strength. Therefore, most of these people stopped after calling out 2 to 3 gold coins. 5 gold coins. Han Shua's patience finally won him a large sum of money. A handsome journeyman knight with golden curls and a gentle and humble appearance called out a higher price than the others. When he called out 5 gold coins, many people stopped talking and looked at him with some surprise. One of them said, Lawrence, a journeyman warrior, is only worth 5 gold coins. Although this kid has some strength, he's definitely not worth 5 gold coins. Aren't you calling out a bit too high? Lawrence smiled faintly and said mildly, it's a bit high, but we've come a bit late. All the warriors have already been chosen, so we don't have any other choices. We can only choose him. Everyone thought that he was right after he said this. After all, Han Shua's strength was probably the highest amongst the many human targets in the hall. If the warriors from before were still here, perhaps Han Shua wouldn't be worth this price. But now that Han Shua's strength was the highest here, the night students didn't have any other choices. Everyone was in a hurry to find someone to spar with, so Han Shua's price naturally rose. What a wondrous friend, how about 5 gold coins? Lawrence looked at Han Shua with a smile and said amiably. Looking left and right, Han Shua saw that no one else was raising the price. He then looked at Lawrence's strength and saw that he was the highest amongst them. He nodded and agreed, "Deal." Lawrence walked towards Han Shura and fished out 5 gold coins from his ornate purse, handing them to Han Shura. Lawrence, here are 5 gold coins. I hope you'll be able to help me in the upcoming trials." Han Shura was a bit excited as he accepted the 5 gold coins. When Brian had been sold to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, he'd also been sold for 5 gold coins. Now, 5 gold coins for a sparring partner was enough to buy Brian's life. With Han Shua's identity, 5 gold coins was an absolutely astronomical price. It was enough for Han Shua to regain his freedom. "I'm Brian, please advise me." Han Shua smiled courteously at the god of fortune, Lawrence, after putting the gold coins into his shabby purse. "Come with me, let me see if you're worth those 5 gold coins." Lawrence walked out of the hall after saying this, Han Shua following closely behind. The training field of the night school was more or less similar to the one in the School of Magic, except that there were fewer magical tools and a few more obstacles in the corners. Only Han Shua and Lawrence were present in this spacious training field. The ground was made of rough, hard rocks, and the ground was hard to walk on. When Lawrence walked in, he changed into a set of white training clothes and took off his sword, setting it to the side. He then looked at Han Shua with interest and said with a smile, "Those 5 gold coins aren't easy to earn, are you ready?" Han Shua thought to himself. Due to the forging of magical yuan, his body was as tough and strong as the sky and the earth compared to the original Brian. Add to that the odd magical yuan, which seemed to have some miraculous resistance to fighting aura, and he wasn't afraid that Lawrence would use fighting aura to completely damage his body. He didn't make any preparations either, so he nodded directly at Lawrence. "Take note, you're a sparring partner. You can only dodge and block, but not attack." Lawrence seemed to have noticed that Han Shua was a newbie, so he gave some instructions before making his move. He only slowly walked towards Han Shua after seeing that Han Shua understood. Just as Lawrence was about to reach Han Shua's side, he suddenly sped up like lightning. His empty left hand was like an unsheathed sword as he stabbed towards Han Shua's chest with the 5 fingers of his palm closed together. Because knights trained in fighting aura, their strength and speed were completely incomparable to that of ordinary strong commoners. Lawrence's thrust was more than 10 times faster and more powerful than Daniel's. Han Shua's vision blurred as he saw Lawrence's arm reach his chest. He was startled and immediately circulated his magical yuan, twisting his body abruptly and dodging to the side. With a ripping sound, the clothes in front of Han Shua's chest were torn open by Lawrence. Han Shua felt a chill in front of his chest and then saw his clothes flutter. He couldn't help but rejoice that he'd dodged in time. It was a pity that before he'd even finished rejoicing, a strong force suddenly surged into his lower abdomen. Han Shua's body involuntarily stumbled backwards, finally landing on his but on a hard rock. He felt as if his stomach and intestines were tangled together, and the pain was extreme. He abruptly lifted his head and discovered that Lawrence's foot was still suspended in midair. Lawrence was looking at him with a face full of ridicule. "Brian, I've already held back this time and didn't take the opportunity to attack. I won't be so merciful next time." Lawrence had condensed fighting aura in that kick just now. However, although Lawrence had used fighting aura on his physical strength and attack, he'd only withdrawn it and hadn't released it. He'd only used fighting aura to increase his physical strength and attack power, and hadn't used fighting aura to directly enter Han Shua's body to destroy Han Shua's body. It was precisely because of this that Han Shua's magical yuan hadn't undergone any changes. His body had forcefully endured the violent impact this time, and his gradually strengthening body had also been immediately damaged. Nodding, Han Shua's brow furrowed tightly as he endured the pain in his lower abdomen. He stood up from the ground and looked coldly at Lawrence. "I'll be careful from now on." Again. Chapter 25. Lawrence looked at Han Shua with a bit of surprise, then smiled and said, "Very good." His body suddenly moved again, appearing in front of Han Shua in the blink of an eye. His leg once again kicked out fiercely like lightning, his target still being Han Shua's lower abdomen. At this moment, Han Shua's lower abdomen had been violently kicked, and his body was already in extreme pain. He knew very well that the speed and strength of Journeyman Knight Lawrence's attacks weren't something that he, who hadn't even passed the solid level of magical yuan, would be able to completely defend against. However, for some reason, Han Shua didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he felt a vague sense of anticipation and excitement. The magical yuan within his body instantly circulated a few times around his lower abdomen, and Han Shua immediately felt the pain in his lower abdomen lessen. He was unprecedentedly focused and calmly faced Lawrence's attacks from behind. Just as Lawrence's kick was about to land, Han Shua had already pushed off with his feet and abruptly retreated backwards, dodging Lawrence's kick with lightning speed. However, Lawrence wasn't the slightest bit surprised, and his body didn't pause in the slightest. After his kick had missed, he instantly caught up to Han Shua's retreating figure. A series of punches and kicks rained down on Han Shua like a torrential storm. This was Lawrence's Journeyman Knight realm. When he circulated his fighting aura to his physical strength and attack power, all aspects of his body would completely surpass that of an average strong man. Even with Han Shua's current agility, he still couldn't avoid being hit repeatedly. Crackling sounds rang out continuously, and apart from Han Shua's face, his chest, waist, abdomen, legs, and arms couldn't be completely defended and were continuously injured by Lawrence. As his body was repeatedly hit, the pain in Han Shua's body grew more and more intense. The speed at which he continuously dodged also began to slow down due to his body's influence. Because of this, he received more and more attacks. In the end, Han Shua's legs felt as heavy as lead. Every movement he made seemed to weigh more than 10,000 kilograms. If it wasn't for the fact that Han Shua had continuously tempered his body with demonic yuan during this period of time, Brian's originally frail body wouldn't have been able to withstand a minute of Lawrence's storm-like attacks. He would have been beaten to death. The last time they faced Claude and Eric, both of them had used Qi to directly enter Han Shua's body. The violent fighting aura was immediately enveloped by demonic yuan the moment it entered his body. This was why Han Shua's physical body didn't suffer too much damage. Han Shua hadn't suffered too many injuries after having his fighting aura enter his body twice. This caused Han Shua to faintly look down on these warriors and knights. But after being beaten up so badly by Lawrence, Han Shua finally understood that his previous thinking was completely wrong. The reason why he hadn't been injured before was entirely due to the miraculous effects of the demonic yuan. If it wasn't for the demonic yuan within his body, his internal organs would have been completely destroyed when the fighting aura entered his body. No wonder he hadn't died on the spot when Claude's fighting aura had entered his body. Why were so many people astonished? Why was Eric so confident that he would undoubtedly die when his fighting aura entered his body and didn't even bother to examine himself? Lawrence had now changed the way he used his fighting aura. He didn't directly use the fighting aura to destroy his internal organs, but instead increased the power and speed of his attacks. This way, the miraculous effects of the demonic yuan couldn't be utilized and he could only passively endure it with his physical body. Bam! The same kick once again landed on Han Shua's lower abdomen. Han Shua stumbled backwards and finally fell to the ground again, unable to withstand the force. Han Shua now had 2 broken ribs and countless other injuries. Apart from the skin on his face that was fine, his entire body had suffered unprecedented damage. Han Shua's body trembled and he constantly tried to stand up, but every time he stood up, he would sway and fall again. Now, every time Han Shua's body twisted, it would bring him intense pain. But at this moment, Han Shua was actually ecstatic. He could clearly feel that the speed at which the magical yuan circulated was much faster than usual. It continuously flowed to all the painful parts of his body, causing those painful wounds and broken bones to have a strange burning sensation. Han Shua understood that his previous judgment had been correct. Breaking through to the solid realm was indeed the quickest method. The magical yuan was circulating abnormally now and was continuously repairing his damaged physical body, forging and polishing his muscles, bones, skin, and flesh over and over again, making his physical body more and more resilient in the future. Although his body was in unbearable pain, Han Shuo was extremely satisfied in his heart. He grit his teeth as he screamed and grinned. He finally forced himself to stand up and looked directly at Lawrence, saying, "I think our deal can continue for a long time." Lawrence stopped and stood in front of Han Shuo, frowning as he watched Han Shuo's body sway and finally stand up after falling over and over again. As the attacker, Lawrence naturally understood the power of his attack just now. Even an ordinary novice warrior wouldn't be as tenacious as Han Shuo when faced with such a violent attack, even with the protection of fighting aura. What surprised Lawrence the most was that Han Shuo could still laugh and scream in agony even after enduring such a fierce attack. Lawrence could also feel from Han Shuo's laughter that Han Shuo was truly filled with joy. This made Lawrence feel incredulous. When Han Shuo said that he wanted a long-term deal, Lawrence first started and then smiled faintly. "Brian, you're very interesting. But if you want a long-term deal, it'll depend on your body and if you can take it. To be honest, I didn't use my full strength today, nor did I use my sword. I have plenty of gold coins. If you still want to earn money like this, you can come find me anytime next time. We'll keep the same price in the future, 5 gold coins each time. How about it?" Nodding, Han Shuo said, "No problem, I'll be back soon." "Very good, Brian, you're a very interesting person. I hope you'll recover soon. My attacks will be even fiercer next time, so you better be prepared." Lawrence changed his clothes as he spoke, put on his sword, and left the training field. Han Shuo didn't immediately get up and leave after Lawrence left, but rather sat down cross-legged and began to use magical yuan over and over again to forge and repair his heavily injured body according to the training methods of magical yuan. After a while, Han Shuo felt that the strength that he'd lost was slowly returning as the magical yuan flowed through his body. His 2 legs that had originally weighed over 10,000 pounds also regained some strength. Although his body was still in pain, it was a bit better than before when he'd been completely powerless and in excruciating pain. Han Shuo grimaced as he moved his body, feeling the pain in his body. He grinned and laughed heartily as he endured the pain in his body. He slowly got up and wobbled his way out of the training field. It's Brian, are you alright?" Han Shuo had just walked out of the training field when he heard someone exclaim next to him. Turning around, Han Shuo discovered that it was the young warrior Jared who'd kindly advised him in the hall earlier. Jared's tight-fitting robes were a bit dusty and there were some traces of sweat on his forehead and clothes, but he didn't seem to have suffered much damage. "It's nothing." Han Shuo nodded at Jared with a faint smile and responded faintly. As a warrior with plenty of battle experience, Jared could tell with a glance that Han Shuo's condition wasn't as unharmed as he'd said. He'd had plenty of experience as a human target and naturally understood that although nothing could be seen from the outside, it didn't mean that the body wasn't injured. Han Shuo's current condition, whether it was his gait or his facial expressions, all indicated that his body was in terrible shape. Jared quickly approached Han Shuo and reached out to support Han Shuo. He frowned. "You're still saying it's nothing? Your body must be in terrible shape right now. How about this, I'll send you back. It's a good thing you made it out alive. I thought you'd be beaten to death." Jared had good intentions, but Han Shuo was now an errant slave of the necromancy major, and a crazy one at that. If he went back with Jared, it would definitely attract some unnecessary trouble. In addition, Han Shuo didn't want to owe anyone favors. Although his body was in terrible shape right now, as long as he endured it, it wouldn't be a problem for him to walk slowly. Therefore, Han Shuo pulled away Jared's supporting hand and said with a smile, "Thank you, Jared. It's really nothing, I can go back myself." After saying this, Han Shuo was about to leave, but when he turned around he suddenly saw a familiar figure walking towards him from afar, Claude. Claude had a human target behind him and was also walking towards the night student's training field. It looked like he was also planning on training himself as a human shield. When he'd come to the Night Academy, Han Shuo had already made preparations to meet Claude. Last time in the Light Magic Academy, Han Shuo's little skull had almost been smashed to pieces by Claude's attacks. Even Han Shuo's fighting aura had entered his body. If it weren't for the magical yuan wrapping around his fighting aura, Han Shua's life would have been lost at Claude's hands. Claude didn't take this matter to heart, and didn't know that the owner of the little skull was Han Shua. However, Han Shua had already secretly noted down this debt and planned on paying it back in the future. Although he'd long since made preparations to meet Claude, his body was in terrible shape right now. Han Shua wasn't willing to meet Claude at this time. Otherwise, if he guessed wrongly and Claude took revenge because he was unhappy with him last time, only death would await him in his current physical condition. When he saw Claude slowly walk over with a sunny smile on his face and turn his head to discuss something with the night students next to him, Han Shua couldn't help but rapidly think of a way to avoid Claude. Chapter 26. When Claude came closer and closer, Han Shua grinned and gave a low cry. He bent his body and lowered his head to grab at his ankle, as if to examine the injury. Jared frowned involuntarily when he saw Han Shua's movements and leaned towards Han Shua. He supported Han Shua with one hand and said, "How is it? Is your ankle injured? Let me take a look." "It's nothing, I just twisted it a little." Han Shua bent his back and lowered his head as he said lowly. Claude and a few night students had just arrived at this time. These people had all arrived later and didn't recognize Han Shua. There were many who were severely injured or disabled in this place, so Han Shua's current performance didn't draw too much attention. Claude glanced at Han Shua's figure and didn't pay much attention to it. He chatted and laughed with the people next to him and passed by Han Shua to leave. Han Shua's ankle had indeed been twisted earlier and was now a bit swollen. Jared lowered his head to take a look and exclaimed softly, "It's swollen so badly. Let me take you back." Seeing that Claude's footsteps were getting further and further away, Han Shua straightened his body again and twisted on his toes. He smiled at Jared. "I suddenly feel much better." "Thank you, Jared. There's really no need." Han Shua's walking speed increased after he'd spoken these words. He didn't even make a sound as he quickly disappeared around the corner. Jared shook his head with a face full of confusion when he saw that Han Shua seemed to be fine. He said with surprise, "What a strange person." Han Shua returned to the necromancy major of the School of Magic when the sky was about to darken, dragging a body riddled with wounds. Most of Han Shua's necromancy errand boy tasks were taken over by Carrie and Borg now, so Han Shua didn't have to worry about them. After returning and receiving his dinner, Han Shua immediately returned to the warehouse. After locking the door tightly, he immediately began to use demonic arts to continuously forge and repair his body. There wasn't a single part of his body that didn't hurt. His skin, flesh, tendons, and bones were all severely injured. The demonic yuan circulated through his entire body in accordance with the demonic arts training method. Every time the demonic yuan circulated through his entire body, Han Shua would feel his strength gradually recovering amidst the burning pain. During this process, the magical yuan circulated unceasingly, seemingly strengthening bit by bit, bringing Han Shua a new pleasant surprise. He thought to himself, "It seems that the process of body forging is also a gradual process of increasing demonic yuan. In the future, I'll have to continuously endure this kind of damage in order to temper my body." In the latter half of the night, the pain in Han Shua's body had improved a lot. At this time, Han Shua continued to practice the mystical glacial spellfire, circulating the demonic yuan to the palms of his hands over and over again according to the circulation method of the mystical glacial spellfire. Time flew by quickly, and Han Shua's entire being sunk into a strange state that he was completely unaware of. There were no distracting thoughts in his mind, only the persistence and tenacity of training. He had long since forgotten the pain from the injuries on his body, and just continued to circulate the demonic yuan according to the circulation method of the mystical glacial spellfire. In the past, Han Shua had always restrained himself when he practiced demonic arts, and would wake up after a certain time. He had never been so engrossed in it before. The Han Shua of today seemed to be lost in it, forgetting the passage of time, forgetting his own existence, and forgetting all worldly distracting thoughts. Bam! The small door to the warehouse was abruptly slammed open, and Han Shua abruptly woke up. His brow creased, and his eyes shot cold lightning straight at Jack. Jack trembled in fright when Han Shua's gaze landed on him, and only exclaimed softly when he saw the cold lightning in Han Shua's eyes recede. "Brian, so you really were in the warehouse? I thought something had happened to you." Han Shua immediately checked the state of his body after he woke up, and suddenly discovered that his body, which had been badly injured, had more or less recovered. The demonic yuan within his body was a bit stronger than before, and his mental strength was also much clearer than before. "What could have happened to me? I just woke up a day late. Borg and Carrie helped me clean anyways, so it's no big deal." Han Shua shook his stiff neck, which emitted creaking sounds. When Han Shua walked down from the small wooden bed and twisted his body, the bones in his entire body made crisp popping sounds, causing Jack to freeze in place in shock. After a while, Jack seemed to suddenly wake up when the strange sounds in Han Shua's body had disappeared. He called out involuntarily, "Oh Brian, you didn't just wake up a day late. You haven't appeared for 6 days in a row. I knocked on the door for a long time, but you didn't respond. I thought something had happened to you." Han Shua was also startled when Jack said this. 6 days? Could it be that he'd trained for a whole 6 days? Han Shua suddenly remembered that in the memories that Chu Kanglin had left behind, there was a saying of entering the demonic path when practicing demonic arts. Due to coincidental circumstances, demonic practitioners would sometimes fall into the realm of entering the demonic path. Depending on the situation, entering the demonic path could be divided into 2 types, active and passive. When someone entered the demonic path, their mind would change greatly and they would become bloodthirsty. Their body would feel no pain, and both their demonic arts and physique would be greatly enhanced as they entered the demonic path. They wouldn't stop for even a moment, and would want to continuously destroy everything and everyone in front of them. This type of entering the demonic path was active. The other type was Han Shua's previous situation. He had suddenly entered the demonic path in the midst of training. He was muddle-headed and couldn't sense it, but his bodily functions and the flow of demonic yuan would be many times stronger than usual. He couldn't sense the state of his training, but could sense the tremendous changes in his body when he suddenly awoke. Of these 2 types of entering the demonic path, the first one usually occurred when one's mind was disturbed and severely stimulated. If one didn't die from the endless slaughter during entering the demonic path, their vitality would be greatly damaged, and there would be some side effects. Han Shua's peaceful entering the demonic path was the better option. Normally, one would enter this realm miraculously during the course of training, and their strength would increase greatly after they awoke. "Oh, that's because I've been a bit sleepy lately and have been sleeping too deeply. Oh right, why did you come looking for me?" Han Shua felt his stomach empty as he spoke. He immediately understood that his body was in dire need of food and nutrients after not eating for 6 days. Seeing Han Shua rub his stomach, little fatty Jack rummaged through his clothes and took out a large piece of bread for Han Shua. He then said, "I was worried about you. Also, Master Fanny asked me to take you to her laboratory." "Oh, right, that little witch Lisa also asked me about you. I wonder if she's looking for trouble with you again." "I see. I'll go to Master Fanny's first. Let's go," Han Shua said as he nibbled on Jack's bread and walked out of the warehouse. It was a good thing that the little skull had been pushed under the bed by Han Shua during this time, so Jack didn't notice anything strange when he suddenly barged in. After fixing the lock on the door that Jack had smashed open, Han Shua headed straight for Fanny's laboratory. Knock knock knock, Han Shua stood at the door to Fanny's laboratory and raised his hand to knock on the door. "Come in." Fanny's gentle voice sounded from within the laboratory. Han Shua pushed the door open and walked in after hearing it. There were a few magic scrolls spread out on a round table in the middle of the laboratory. The magic scrolls were engraved with mysterious and exquisite magical characters and diagrams. Even a rookie like Han Shua, who had just entered the Hall of Magic, could feel the strong magical pulses from the magic scrolls from afar. At this moment, Fanny was bent over and chanting an incantation. Her slender fingers were dipped in the brown magic potion beside her as she sketched out exquisite lines on the magic scrolls. These exquisite lines seemed disorderly, but they also gave off a very harmonious and wonderful feeling. After a while, Fanny had sketched out a scroll and infused magical elements into the magic scroll after chanting an incantation. A desolate, lonely, and gloomy presence immediately emanated from within the scroll. A dark brown light flashed on the scroll and it automatically rolled up. Putting away the completed magic scroll, Fanny lifted her head to take a look and couldn't help but grin lightly. "Oh, it's Brian. How are the injuries on your back?" "Many thanks to Master Fanny's concern. The injuries on my back have all healed." Han Shuo nodded and responded. Han Shuo understood that he couldn't keep pretending to be crazy. Although being crazy would bring him some convenience, there would be problems sooner or later if he continued. Since that was the case, he might as well slowly change himself and let everyone unknowingly accept a new version of himself. Even if he changed then, they wouldn't find it abrupt, but would instead think that he had suddenly come to a realization after going crazy. Brian, who had possessed the body, had suffered a great deal in the necromancy major. Han Shuo had originally decided to take revenge for Brian after climbing out of the grave. He'd more or less taught Carrie, Borg, and Baklissa a lesson by now. It could be said that he'd taken quite a bit of revenge for Brian. Han Shuo was still in the necromancy major because he was making plans for his future. After understanding this world, Han Shuo finally understood that he had to continuously increase his strength in order to survive in this world. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force was a place where he could continuously improve himself. Han Shuo had stayed here to make use of the Academy's resources to continuously improve all aspects of himself, including strength, knowledge, and a complete understanding of this world. Therefore, Han Shuo knew that he couldn't continue being crazy like this. He needed to change himself bit by bit. "Oh, that's great. We're planning on going out on a trip and letting the students test out their progress in magic in the outside world. Come with us and help them pack their things. I'll also take a good look at your body's condition on the way. What do you think, Brian?" Fanny put down the things in her hands and smiled faintly at Han Shuo. Startled, Han Shuo thought for a moment and felt that this was an opportunity. He nodded involuntarily. "All right. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality."